Good evening. We begin with Yemen because the coalition of Arab states fighting Iran-backed Houthi rebels in that country has today dismissed as biased a UN report which accuses both sides of possible war crimes. Well, the UN Human Rights Group's report, which was released on Wednesday, said that the coalition's bombardment had caused heavy civilian casualties and imposed heavy restrictions on Red Sea ports and also the capital's airport, meaning that Yemenis had been deprived of vital supplies. Well, the Saudi-led coalition says those findings are inaccurate. Well, for more on that report, we can speak now to Fatima Abu ALASRAR, who is a Yemen expert and also a senior analyst at the Arabiya Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us. The US and other Western powers have supported the Saudi-led coalition in one way or another. And this report must make for pretty uncomfortable reading for them in particular, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the United States has expressed concern over the human rights report. And it seems like it wants to send a strong message to the Arab coalition that it does not necessarily want to create an atmosphere of impunity that could hurt any effort to reach a comprehensive peace agreement, which is what the UN envoy, special envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffith, is working towards. And there will be meetings in September later on this year where they will be discussing basically or starting the negotiations for a peace agreement in Yemen and just seeing how far that can go. And definitely the United States is, expressing concern. As you have heard yesterday, Jim Mattis have said that basically the support for the coalition is not necessarily unconditional. So this should definitely give a pause and cause to reevaluate the support. At the same time, the United States has been engaged somewhat positively as it has shared intelligence with the coalition in a way that has relatively improved from the airstrikes. And unfortunately, it's sort of like in the targeting in terms of the airstrikes, but recent aberrant airstrikes have generated a lot of backlash that has led to, sort of like more condemnation of the Arab coalition's involvement in not being too careful with civilians' lives.
But given who the opponent of the Saudi-led coalition is, it's the Houthi rebels, of course, backed up by Iran. And, we all know the state of relations between the United States and Iran right now. And, of course, great rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia and its allies. Do you think, therefore, realistically, we would see some halt in support for the Gulf Arab side there in Yemen? Or do you think that's just completely improbable based on that report? Do you see them pulling out any support at all?
Well, obviously, there are various dimensions to this conflict, and Iran is implicated, although it continues to deny its support to the Houthis. But they continue to send ballistic missiles. The Houthis have committed egregious violations, and are certainly advancing Iran's agenda in the region. And the United States definitely wants to roll back from Iranians' intervention in the region. So it must support the Saudi coalition. I think that would be essential, but it doesn't necessarily, we don't necessarily understand what the limitations that could be for the support, whether it will, for example, stop mid-air refueling, or if it would require more emphasis from the coalition to, minimize civilian casualties, if it's going to be even, further engaged in targeting and assisting the coalition. So I think that perhaps, a complete stop in supporting of the coalition might be unreasonable, but perhaps what is needed here is for the United States to pretty much, let the coalition know that, it must do its best to attempt to minimize from any type of inhumane consequences that could happen due to the use of, American weapons that are sold to the coalition.
And just briefly, if you will, of course, both sides criticized in that UN report But in your reading of it, does one side get harsher treatment than the other?
I think it's really interesting. I know that, of course, there's usually mixed feelings for this report. A lot of activists in Yemen have noticed that some of the reporting has probably been more favorable towards the Houthis. There has been entire regions in Yemen that have suffered from Houthis' mass atrocities that have, went completely unmentioned in the report. There is nothing mentioned on the south of Yemen in Abyan or Adan and the street killings that the Houthis have done in these areas, where hundreds, if not even thousands, have died. So there has been more a focus on mainstream and big events that are happening in northern areas, and there's been definitely, perhaps less focus in terms of what the Houthis are doing, which is much more widespread and insidious in so many ways, but does not get the same type of coverage that you might assume in Western media. So the report, for, I would say, many activists, looked slightly uninformed by perhaps major headlines rather than what actually is happening on the ground.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Fatima Abu al-Asra, a Yemen expert and senior analyst at the Arabia Foundation. Thank you very much indeed.